Dragon's Milk, Flight of the Dragon, Kim. Did I say that right? Was it Kim?
Yes.
Fantasy writer, I understand. Sign of the Dove, and Ancient, Strange, and Lovely, as well as the award-winning Alphabet of Dreams, Shadow Spinner, Walk Across the Sea, and Falcon in the Glass. Miss Fletcher lives in Wilsonville, Oregon.
Thank you very much. Actually, I just sort of recently moved to Hillsboro. Not super recently, but recently enough that I'm out of packed and I can't even find, like I was thinking, oh, I should bring a copy of this book, and it's in my garage somewhere. But anyway, so I was thrilled to be invited, and I'm so glad to see that I know that a lot of you are from Hillsboro, and I'm just thrilled to see the vibrant community in the new place where I have moved to. So thank you very much for Jacobson's books, Bards and Brews, Primrose and Tumbleweeds in Iowa, for however you all came together and I got involved in it. So thank you very much. And I'm just going to talk about my most recent book a little bit. It's called Falcon in the Glass, and I'm going to start off by talking about the bird kenners. I made that up myself. The bird kenners it's mostly a realistic historical novel, and I did, the research, everything is historically accurate except for the bird kenners. Which actually come from my dragon books. Bird kenners are people who can communicate in some magical way with birds. To ken being an old-fashioned way of saying to see or to understand or to know. And the bird kenners started out in my book Dragon's Milk, and then to the prequel and sequel, and then they moved over to my sort of dystopian novel, Ancient, Strange, and Lovely, and I still didn't seem to be done with the bird kenners, so I put them in Falcon in the Glass. People who are perceived as different, and this is, so we're talking about dragons and also this, I've always come in from a lot of flack from people who feel threatened by that difference in some way. And I wanted to use the bird kenners sort of to explore that. So Falcon in the Glass has nothing to do with dragons at all, but bird kenners, oh yeah, they show up on the very first page. So I'm going to read the prologue, which is the first page of the book. It was a ghostly sight, so startlingly strange that for some time afterward the captain wondered if he might have imagined it. It appeared out of the fog, out of the hush of the still waters before him, as he guided his ship through the haze-shrouded islands of the lagoon. At first it was a faint, darkish smudge on the water. As it grew near, the smudge thickened into the shape of a small, sailless boat, filled stem to stern with children, was it? Children and birds? The little craft rode low in the water, packed tight with its odd, silent cargo. The birds varied in size and shape, perched on shoulders, on arms, on wrists, on fingers, on heads. As the bird passed hard by his ship, a girl looked up and caught the captain's eye. Her face was heart-shaped elven. Her eyes were fierce. For a long moment they gazed at each other, the captain and the girl. Then the little boat slid away behind him and vanished in the mist. So this story takes place in Venice, Italy, which is my favorite city in the world apart from Hillsboro. Ever since I saw a documentary on Venice like 20 years ago, I've been sort of semi-obsessed with it. What is it about Venice? I think it's so stunningly beautiful, and when you walk through those old streets and canals, you can almost imagine the last 500 years just dropping away, and you're living in the Renaissance. It's also partly that Venice is, sinking, so it's not going to be around forever, which makes it a little bit more precious. And it's partly the water. Everything is reflected, water on stone, stone on water, it just shimmers. So in between writing my other books, I began to read about Venice. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I just started reading. I got really interested in glass making on the island of Murano, and then I found out that some historians claim that during the Renaissance, if a glassmaker, an established glassmaker, left Murano to practice his craft in some other country, the authorities would send professional assassins to kill them. Talk about your industrial espionage. Only you don't go to jail or get a fine, you just like die. So that was it for me. That was just, that's the kind of idea that sort of rings my chimes. I was gonna write this book. So we have Renzo, my protagonist. He's 13. His father has been killed by one of the assassins, and Renzo's afraid they might come for him too. What Renzo wants more than anything is to be a glassmaker as his father was, but he is only allowed to practice at night. So one night, here's what happens, and here's chapter 1. Stranger in the Glassworks. Something rustled in the dark, a sound so faint Renzo barely heard it at all, but it told him he was not alone. Out of the corner of one ear he heard it. His eyes and mind and heart had belonged entirely to the glass before him, and not to the signs of danger. It glowed copper orange, the glass, a veined and stunted sun, blazing in the gloom of the workshop. Renzo had gathered it molten on the end of the blowpipe. He had rolled it on a stone moro. He had shaped it in a magioso mold. He had set the pipe to his lips and breathed, just long enough and hard enough to belly out the glass in the slightest curve and begin to make it his. Of sounds he'd taken no notice. He heard them but did not mark them. Not until the new sound came, the rustling, faint and quick. He stood still as stones now, waves of prickling goose flesh coursing down his back. This was a different kind of sound, out of place in the glassworks in the dead of night. It came again, rustle, shiver, scritch, above. Renzo peered into the shadows where the furnace's glow flickered across the rafters and beheld a bird. Renzo's knees went weak. His breath escaped in a sigh of relief. Only a bird. He wanted to laugh then at his foolishness, at his heart still clattering between his ribs, at the glass, now a misshapen lump, darkening as it cooled, crumpling in upon itself. Only a bird, a little falcon, a kestrel. He watched it for a moment, breathing, waiting for his heart to settle. The assassins would not return, he told himself. They'd done what they'd come to do. The falcon rattled its feathers. Better get it out of here, though. The Petroni did not tolerate birds in the glassworks. What if a feather, or worse, should fall on the smooth surface of a newly worked copper bowl? Renzo knocked the blowpipe against the rim of the pail at his feet. The glass cracked off and clattered among the heaped remains of his earlier failures. He set the blowpipe on the rack beside the other pipes and rods and made his way across the wide open floor of the glassworks and opened the open door. Outside, still waters lapped against stone. The chill winter breeze touched his face, carrying the smells of the lagoon, fish and salt and tar. Mist rose from the dark canal and crept like smoke along the lane. The sweat grew clammy on Renzo's body and made him shiver. A dark pool of weariness pressed down on the crown of his head and seeped into his eyes. Nothing had gone well tonight, and he was so far behind. He stepped back inside, clapped his hands, shouted at the bird, but it must have felt snug there, high up in the rafters. It did not budge. He scooped a handful of pebbles from outside and tossed one at the bird. It let out a hoarse cry and took off flying. He pursued, throwing more pebbles, not trying to hit it, just drive it out the door. Cease with that! Basta! Renzo's heart seized. He whirled round to see who had shouted. The figure came hurtling out of the shadows behind the woodpile, came so fast Renzo barely had time to put up his hands to defend himself before she was raining blows down upon him. She dealt him one last shove and then bolted toward the open doorway. She twisted back and sent the kestrel a look, a strange look, like a summons. The bird sailed out of the workshop behind her. Astounded, Renzo stared after them, girl and bird fleeing together, dissolving into the dark, into the mist. Before they vanished entirely, he thought he saw the kestrel swoop down and come to perch upon her shoulder as she ran. But no, he must have imagined that. So Renzo gets the idea that maybe this girl, whose name is Letta, can help him by holding the hot glass with a metal glass-making tool so that Renzo can practice better. For reasons I won't go into now, he's sort of stuck doing this alone and at night. He figures that she will keep the secret because she's a homeless outcast and she's not supposed to be in Murano anyway. But it turns out that she is part of a group of homeless bird kenning children, and she takes them into the glass works one night. And she tells Renzo that she will refuse to help him unless he lets them stay and get warm. This could get him in a lot of trouble. It completely enrages and terrifies Renzo, but there's not much he can do about it since he needs her help. He just sort of ignores all the rest of the children. He really wants nothing to do with any of them except for Letta. But one day a little boy breaks some precious goblets and Renzo yells at him, and the little boy runs out into the night and disappears. Renzo reluctantly goes searching for him. So this is a little way into chapter 14. It's my last reading of the night. And this chapter is called Small Wet Boy. It was a cold rain, the kind that gathers itself into fat, red, heavy droplets that strike your head and shoulders like a hail of tiny stones. Renzo walked along the edge of the canal, uncertain where to begin searching. Traces of daylight leaked over the horizon to the east. The streets were not so black and fearsome as before, but darkness still inhabited doorways and niches and corners, any one of which might secretly harbor a small, wet boy. A hollow thump from the canal, a boat tethered there, covered with a canvas tarp. Renzo knelt, unlaced a corner of the tarp. He peered inside. Oars, a heap of netting, nothing more. He replaced the tarp and stood, surveying the boats. They lined the canal for as far as he could see. Many more, he knew, lay beyond. Still more on the other canals. Impossible. You couldn't look under every tarp of every boat in Murano. He let his gaze slide beyond the boats to the rain-dimpled waters of the canal, dark, opaque. The boy might have tried to hide in a boat, but the image came to Renzo unbidden. The slip of a foot, a small child falling, swallowed up with a splash, dark water closing over a cap of dark hair until the body fetched up later, bloated and white. "Paolo!" Renzo cried. His voice, panicky and sharp, echoed in his ears until the rattle of rain drowned it out. He wiped water from his eyes, feeling foolish. The boy wasn't likely to come to his call, not after the way he'd chastised him. He'd have to start searching, that was all. But where? He moved along the canal, looking for a tarp that wasn't wholly fastened, peering into dim alleys as he passed. The rain was relentless. His cloak no longer repelled water, but courted it, weighed on him as if it were woven of lead. The chill seeped into him, lodged deep in his bones. His feet, benumbed by cold, felt like hard wooden blocks inside his boots. Once he thought he saw the boy, but it was only two old beggars huddled in a doorway. Another time he heard a splash on the pavement behind him, but when he looked back, nothing. After a while, when he looked up, something caught his eye, a square tower so tall it split the sky. A church. If you were a small, wet boy, you might well take refuge in a church. Renzo sloshed through the puddles in the campo. He pushed open the heavy oaken door and stepped inside. The sound of the rain dimmed at once. It was darker here. Renzo waited to let his eyes adjust, waited till he could make out the dim colonnades to either side, the ancient mosaic floor, the rows of benches before him. He trod forward, feet swooshing loudly in his boots. He scanned the benches. It was the bird that he saw first, a fluttering motion, a small gray-brown blur atop long, spindly legs, and beside the bird, a boy-sized lump. Renzo edged along the bench toward the boy. The bird hopped a short distance away. The boy was sleeping, Renzo saw. His wet hair clung to his scalp. His skinny wrists and arms stuck out too far from his sleeves. His skinny legs and ankles stuck out too far from his trousers. One of his boot wrappings had come loose and dangled toward the floor in tatters. A puddle of water had formed beneath him. The boy coughed, then buried his head deeper within his arms. Renzo hesitated. The boy might fear him, might bolt. He leaned over the boy so he could stop him if he tried to flee. Renzo cleared his throat. Nothing. He shook the boy gently. Nothing. "Paolo," Renzo said. The boy sat bolt upright, startling the bird. With a harsh kip, 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 it flew into the air and circled above. Renzo braced himself to prevent the boy's escape, but the boy lunged for him instead, clasped onto him, sobbing. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to break them. Sorry, sorry, sorry." Renzo eased himself onto the bench. He let the boy climb into his lap, cling to him. He put his arms about the thin little body to warm it. The bird fluttered down and alit on the boy's shoulder. It pecked at the hair on his head. He was so light, this boy, just bones and air. Renzo felt the ragged breathing next to his own. "Don't fret, Paolo," he said. "There's little enough harm done. I'll put all to rights." There are some lies, Renzo thought, for which you might be forgiven. Surely God would forgive him for this